and Margarita, I am so excited to get this conversation started. We'll come back to record the formalities of who you are, et cetera, but I want to just jump right in. I had the pleasure of listening and re-listening a couple of times to the conversation that you were a part of with the Soul Alliance, and wanted to come back to really dig into a couple of things that you talked about that really, I think, are important to our understanding how to better make sure young people have the fullest experiences they can to learn in school and in community. Ron, I want to start with a sentence that you ended with, which I thought was very powerful. And your sentence was, the student culture of the school is never ahead of the adult culture. I want you to just take a minute to tell us why you're talking about culture and not climate. We hear so much about school climate, and why you make a distinction between student culture and adult culture.
Karen, I appreciate your invitation to me and to Margarita to join you here. I really do think about school culture all the time, because I think that when students enter a school building, they are shaped by the culture that they enter. And that's not just what adults say. It's not just what posters are on the wall. It's the way adults treat them and treat each other. And so if we hope that students will be courageous and kind and compassionate and respectful and responsible, we need to be modeling those things as adults in the building. That this is not something that we can say one thing and act another. We as adults are the role models for students, and whatever character habits, whatever values that we hope students will pick up and display in their own lives, we need to model those ourselves.
And you're using language very specifically about adults and adult culture. And very often when we have these conversations, we talk about teachers. Who are these other adults that you're talking about, and how critical is it that all of them are engaged in this behavior and shaping?
Karen, I really appreciate your push on that, because I think it's essential that we not limit this to teachers. From a student experience, every adult in the building matters. So the bus driver matters, the person who greets them at the door matters, the secretaries in the office matter, the assistants, the counselors, the nurses, the custodians, everyone in the building interacts with students. And often students spend a lot of their day with people who are non-teachers. If you're a student and you go see the school nurse, that nurse is really important, that nurse responds to you in the right way. If you see a counselor, that it really matters to you. When you go into the cafeteria monitors, the cafeteria manager, if those people are also not modeling the courage, compassion, kindness, respect that we all want to model in a school, it has a profound effect on students. And so I think we should always think of the school culture as the staff culture, not the faculty culture. We should always include full staffs when we work together to become better people as models for that.
Margarita, I want you to chime in here, and I'm so glad you're with us. In that Sold interview, you talked a lot about the importance of your teachers and teacher relationships, but can you talk a little bit about these other adults that Ron was just mentioning? How did you experience this school culture, this adult culture?
Thank you, Karen. With me, I do agree with Ron talking about, besides just teachers being present, other staff members do change the experience that a student has overall. Like, I personally had a very good relationship with our school nurse, and it was nice to see that someone besides my teachers cared about me outside of the classroom. She didn't care about my grades. She didn't care about how much I spoke in class. She was just solely there to make sure that if I had any concerns about myself, if I had any worries or any questions, I was able to go to her as an adult. And that is because she was very inclusive of every student, and she was nice to everyone and didn't exclude students who didn't speak up. She would come out to us, and that's something that as I always say, it's important that sometimes adults start the conversation, or adults just make the first move, because students need that.
Did you experience this adult culture, this intentional adult culture, as different from in your earlier schools because of the attention that Ron talked about of really making sure that all of this is happening? Did it somehow feel different and more cohesive for you?
Yes, it definitely felt different, and that I say especially because of the multiple backgrounds that I grew up in. If I have to compare how teachers and just staff members, my relationship between old teachers and staff members, like back in Africa or in Namibia where I grew up, it is very different with the ones I'm experiencing in America. It was very different with the one that I experienced in middle school versus my high school, Casco Bay High School. And that was because teachers and staff members were really, they acknowledged that their students are important, they acknowledged that their students mattered, and they genuinely cared. And that's the reason why I say it's different, because I never really experienced that until I got into high school.
Ron, I'm curious how you make this happen. And I know we've had this conversation before, but it remains a big question for me. We talk about professional development for teachers and setting aside time for teachers, but we don't talk about doing this with the whole staff. You talk about EL as a professional development organization focused on all of these adults. How do they find time? How do you get all of those people working together and seeing themselves as critical parts of a community?
It's a great question. So Margarita's an incredibly courageous student who's gone through all these different places. She ended up in an EL education high school, and EL education has a big push on making sure we build what we call a spirit of crew, a spirit of teamwork, of looking out for each other among all staff members of a school. And that's really hard to accomplish, as you say, Karen, time-wise. The high school that Margarita attended is a regular public high school in Portland, Maine. It's not a charter school. It's within the regular school district. But we had to negotiate with the district to make sure that we could get staff members together and have those conversations about the kind of human beings we want to be with our students and how we'll make sure that every student's identity is honored in the school, how we make sure every student feels that he or she or they belong in the school. And that means that we have to have some hard conversations with staff. We have to discuss race. We have to discuss gender identity. We have to discuss sexual orientation, income issues. Because if staff can't talk about those things with each other, how can they help students talk about those things? And so it really is a focus on staff crew in order to create the conditions for good student crew.
I want to get to that conversation about student crew in a minute, because Margarita, you gave an incredibly powerful description of what that crew experience meant to you as you went through high school. But I'm curious, Ron, I don't know about Castle Bay, but certainly in lots of schools across the country, there really are, frankly, race and class differences between who the teachers are and who those other staff are in the building. So when you bring these adults together to have these conversations, what happens? Is that an opportunity to actually address some of those issues?
Karen, that's true in many places. And I think that's why we need to call these courageous conversations, because it's hard for us to have conversations about class identity, race identity, sexual orientation, gender identity. We're not used to talking about those things. They're uncomfortable often. And there are going to be differences. But I think if we can't start those conversations with each other and create a safe space to find common ground, then we're not going to be able to establish a safe place for all kids. Because all staff members need to feel that they are safe in the building too, no matter what their culture, no matter what their language background is, no matter where they've come from. And often in schools we have a hierarchy where only the faculty are considered the ones that matter, and so we don't spend time thinking that the teaching assistants and the support staff for the school also need to feel that they belong. And if they don't feel that they belong, then you create that sense of a school where not everyone feels safe and they belong. So we have to have the hard conversations about making sure that everyone's identity is valued on the staff so that we can create that sense for students as well.
And as you're creating that sense of belonging and appreciation for identity, are you also creating in this model an opportunity to really understand how all of these staff are contributing to community and contributing to student success?
Yes, and I feel that, as Margarita said, sometimes the most important person in a school for a child is not their teacher or their teachers. It may be a counselor, it may be the nurse, it may be an administrator who's just taken them under their wing. It could be their crew leader, who could be anyone in the school. And so I think we need to make sure that all staff feel empowered because they're all making a difference in student lives.
So, Margarita, we've heard this word crew. Tell us what crew is, what it meant to you, how crews are set up. What is this critical grouping mechanism that seems to be so central to EL education and certainly seemed to be so important to your experience?
So crew is a group of about 13 to 15 students that were randomly put together in the beginning of their high school, their freshman year, and each student stays in the same crew throughout their whole high school career. And crew is just a really important group throughout the high school career because every student that has graduated has at least one really close friend from their crew, someone who's lifelong in their life. And outside from that, from creating friendships and just making new connections, in your crew, you're going to find people who you genuinely wouldn't talk to if they were not in your crew because you just don't feel like you were able to approach them, or they're just not the type of people that you surround yourself with. And it's because of that differences that we find within our crew that I say it really impacted me as a student, and it's made me see different people differently because I was able to learn a lot, and I was able to see people differently than what I would have thought from seeing them just in the cafeteria or in the classroom.
And did this intentional sort of plan to bring students randomly together and then keep them together, did that change the overall student culture? Did it eliminate cliques? Did it somehow make you all feel like a more cohesive student body?
It definitely did, because in crew, you're not going to see like your best friend in the beginning of the school year. Most of the people in your crew you've never seen in your whole life. So you begin, as a student, you begin to understand that there are other people out there besides your friends who like this specific type of music. There are other people out there who like playing card games, board games. There are people who like playing different instruments. If it weren't for crew, I know that a lot of students, and I'm saying from personal experience, we wouldn't be able to have the same connections or just talk and have a different variety of people to connect to understand, and to talk to.
Such a powerful experience. I appreciate your explaining that and sharing that. One of the other things, as I listened to you, was that you thought was powerful was this idea that you get to go out and have projects and expeditions in the community. And I think one of the things that you said was that actually helped you better understand and be motivated to do the learning in school, the fact that you actually got to go out of school. Can you give us an example of what that kind of an expedition or project is? What does that look like?
Yeah, so within crew, we didn't just sit in a classroom and talk about ourselves or talk to each other. We did like different multiple team bonding activities. In the beginning of our freshman year, at least at Casco Bay, we go to an island and stay there for 4 days and 3 nights, and it's the beginning of freshman year. You don't know anybody, but you're still sharing tents, and it's just an interesting experience because you just learn the process of trusting people that you've never seen in your life. You become vulnerable, which is something that is really important, especially as high school students, because we're all always like, we grow up knowing that, oh, you should keep things to yourself. But once you go into crew, the very first day, I remember we had a fire and everyone was talking about their insecurities with strangers. And it was an amazing experience because throughout the whole year, every end of the year, we have presentations that focus on talking about ourselves. And from freshman year to senior year, you have different themes. So it's just building up on what you know about yourself and you talking about your growth. Because I remember when they first asked us the question of, who am I? Maybe if someone asks you, who are you? You're going to be like, oh, I can talk about myself. But when they actually ask you that for an assignment, that's a whole different experience because you start to question, do I know myself? Like, who am I actually? You start asking yourself that question. So being part of crew is really understanding who you are as an individual, is understanding your growth throughout the 4 years of high school, and seeing and experiencing the other people's growth, your other peers' growth, because nobody necessarily remains the same from freshman year to senior year. And if they are to remain the same kind, motivated person, you still see a growth because they just become better. And yeah.
Ron, talk a little bit about the history of putting this kind of an idea together, both the idea of crew, the idea of crews basically going off on expeditions outside of the school. Talk a little bit more about these community projects. Where did this idea come from? Where did the idea for EL education come from, and how have you perfected it over the years?
Well, EL education, Karen, had two parents. One was the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is where we got our commitment to academic excellence, but also to connecting academic excellence to service in the world. So in Margarita's 4 years of high school, she did a lot of work in the community, research and service work in the community, so that she saw that the academic learning she did could be in service of helping make her community a better place. And it gives, I think, a lot more motivation to students when they see they're not just getting smart for their own edification, they're getting smart to do good for the world, to make the lives better for their family, for their community. The other parent of EL education is Outward Bound USA, which is the organization that brings adults and children into the wilderness, not to teach them wilderness skills, but to teach them teamwork and to work on their character. And the goal of EL education is to change school from being an individual sport to a team sport. So when I was in high school, when I was Margarita's age, my role in high school was just to do well myself, to get good grades and to get myself into college. And if my peers did poorly, it wasn't my responsibility. In fact, it would maybe help me because my class rank would be better. So there was no structural motivation for me to help everyone. For Margarita, it was a very different place because Margarita's role in an EL high school was to get all of her crewmates and classmates to success, to make sure all of them got into college. And 99% of them did. And that wasn't just the teachers. It was Margarita and her peers helping each other. And so there's a sense of this is a team sport. And that came, Karen, from the idea that when you're on an Outward Bound course and you see the top of the mountain, your job is not to get yourself to the top of the mountain. It's to get your whole crew to the top of that mountain. And so that's our vision, that school could be that way too.
An amazing vision. Margarita, give us an example of one of those projects that you did out in the community. Your example of what happened in that sort of freshman immersion process was absolutely incredible. And one of the things, as I listen to both of you, that I reflect on is sort of evidenced in what Ron just said. This is really a true blend of a youth development organization with the idea of school. What you described is often the kind of experience that young people have when they go to Outward Bound or they go to a summer camp, but rarely do they get to do that with the same group of kids over and over again. And rarely do they get to come back and talk about how that experience actually shaped them and had them get a better sense of self. So your first example was terrific, but can you now give us an example of the kind of project that let you take your learning out into the community and see how it benefits everyone?
So sophomore, every year we do have expeditions, and our first expedition was actually called Build Community, where students went out as freshmen. They went out and talked to they focused on specific neighborhoods and talked to people that lived within those neighborhoods and asked questions like, what would you like to see in your neighborhood? How would you like your neighborhood to be improved? And our culmination was based off the responses that we got. We made little projects and tried to envision and make that vision come to life. It was actually part of our geometry class where we turned those ideas into like 3-dimensional projects. And it was a way of building community, trying to see how different people from different citizens within a neighborhood wanted to see a difference or wanted to see improvements. We were able to make that as freshmen. And sophomore year, I remember we did podcasts, and those podcasts were based on race. It was based on really hard topics that we are often not talking about on a daily basis. And it was really interesting because we did research and we learned how to do podcasts as sophomores. And I know that different people were able to build passions off of that, not just by creating multiple podcasts, but also being able to learn about the different topics that they didn't even know about. Junior year, I remember we went out and I forgot what the name of the expedition was, but we went out and interviewed about 20 or 20 something different, yeah, it was about 20 different people that were actually not necessarily born in Maine, more born or raised in Maine, or Americans. It was a really diverse group of people. We talked to single mothers, we talked to grandmothers, we talked to people and just wanted to know about their story and how they've overcome hard challenges in life. And I don't think that if I didn't go to an EL school, I'm pretty sure that I would never even like bother to start a project like that. And junior year too, we had an expedition called Public Policy, where we had high school students actually questioning policies that were made, policies and systems that we're living under. And I feel like it's a good opportunity to just come out of my own bubble and be like, oh, I'm actually in the real life world. Like, there are things that are happening outside of this small little high school. And besides that, just from learning from expeditions, there are multiple things that our schools do to highlight students, not just academically, but also to praise them as humans, to praise them as individuals. We have this thing called Pathway to Success, where it wasn't focused on who's an A+ student or who's just getting 100% here and there. In Pathways to Success, we would celebrate if someone is just simply being kind to the whole class. We would celebrate if someone says thank you and hi to all the teachers. We'd celebrate if someone just accomplished a goal that some people would see as ridiculous, but you don't know what that means to an individual. So we really are taught to celebrate everything from somebody and everybody. And we also had House Students of the Weeks, where teachers would praise students not just for working hard, they would praise students for persevering, they would praise students for trying their best no matter what, for just completing an assignment that was really hard. People will get praised for that. So that does build character, and it shows us that we're all different, but we're all different in a good way, and we should be celebrated for that.
Those were incredible examples of how you took these expeditions out into your community to really meet individuals you wouldn't otherwise have met and learn from them, and then in turn sort of bring that back and bring that into both your own self-reflection and your own understanding of where you live. I wonder, and I'll just ask this question to both of you, that focus on really getting to know your community as this diverse set of individuals with different life experiences and expectations and roles, how does that overlap with the community places and spaces where you might have spent your time when you weren't in school? Margarita, I remember from the very end of our last conversation, Ron mentioned that you had a long relationship with Boys and Girls Club. How do those kinds of places fit into this conversation?
So those fit in because I was in school, and then I go to the Boys and Girls Club. I go to the library, and those expeditions, I must say that it helped me expand like my connections, because I wouldn't be able to talk to people the same way if I didn't get the experience of going out there and just talking to random people. That is something that I believe my school started for me. I wouldn't be able to just randomly email someone who I saw in a Zoom call and be like, oh, can you help me with this opportunity? And that is something that I think my school taught me. Obviously, some people they just have it in them. But I'd say that based off different expeditions that I've had, I was able to learn skills and adapt to those, which helped me also become more successful as a student.
Ron, talk a little bit, as you're looking at how EL sort of plays out across the country. What are you seeing as other variations on the roles of and the connections to these other kinds of places that are really set up for learning and development to happen? How do they fit into the mix? It's kind of the equivalent of, we're not just talking about teachers, we're talking about all adults. We're not just talking about the school as a focused place of learning, we're talking about these other institutions, libraries and youth organizations and rec centers and sports leagues and museums. How do they fit in?
In a few ways, Karen, and I love your vision, Karen, because the vision that you and your organization brings forward is that we have to be sort of a great web of support for kids in school and out of school, because we don't know which are those things that will be most instrumental in a student's life. I know for you, Margarita, school was super important, but the Boys and Girls Club was as well for you. And for some students, outside organizations become one of the most important things in their lives. A big shift for us at EL, Karen, is to stop seeing the teachers and the faculty of the school as the only experts that can help a student grow. And so we think of the teachers as the coaches, as the coordinators of student growth, but for every expedition, we bring students out to find experts in the community, and we bring experts from the community into the school. And so the teacher herself does not have to be the expert in the community or in the topic or in the subject. In fact, she often says right away, I'm not an expert I'm not an arborist, I'm not an author, I'm not a politician, I'm not a scientist. But we're going to work with an expert scientist in our community. We're going to work with a community activist. We're going to work with an organizer. We're going to go to this outside organization that does youth support and work with them to collaborate to create something. And so students start to think about their community as a place full of expertise beyond the school that they can draw on, that the school can draw on. And I'm sure Margarida, for example, could give examples of all the experts in Portland that she was able to work with as a student that were not her school.
I'd love to hear a couple of those.
Yeah, during our public policy, for example, where we were different students were trying to make change in their community through focusing on the systems, our teachers, some of the teachers didn't even know about our topics. We were able to choose our own topics. So it wasn't like, oh, go to a specific teacher, they're going to help you with this. Students knew what they wanted to work with, and they knew what they wanted to focus with. And they did that. They went for those topics, and there was experts for multiple topics that it was like teachers were learning with the students. It's not just about teachers putting themselves out there and saying what they need, because at the end of the day, we're all learning as a collective.
And I wonder for both of you, as we're talking about experts, there certainly are these kind of experts in particular topics and issues, but there also are life experts. And so, Ron, you started out by saying one of the things that has to happen to create this adult culture is for us to really be courageous about helping young people and helping ourselves explore some of these tough issues around race and class and identity. Do you have people in the building, when you're talking about all adults, who may have expertise, whether it's professional expertise or life expertise, that's relevant for the students? How are we really, as we're looking for all adults to be experts, how are we really making sure that we're tapping into who's in the building with us?
Yeah, I would say we would start, Karen, with exactly that, because there are in every building staff members who bring expertise in culture, in human understanding, in backgrounds, and those might not be the teachers. They might be anyone else in the building that can add to that. And if we have those conversations as a whole staff crew, we can find out people's assets and who can bring those strengths to that culture. I also think it's sometimes important to bring in outside experts. It's hard to talk about race. It's hard to talk about gender identity. It's hard to talk about sexual orientation. And there are many organizations who specialize in leading faculties and staffs in having those hard conversations. And I think it's really important that we do that. If a staff can't do it internally, it's important to find those partners who can come help lead them in those conversations. I know, Margarida, in your crews, you discuss those issues. Your crews discuss race and gender and mental health and emotional health. But that's a hard thing for your teachers to lead those conversations. And if they had not had support, I don't think they could have done that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So let's just jump right in with your answer to Catherine's question.
So through the library, I was able to join clubs that were outside of school, and I made connections with people that were not necessarily my guidance counselor or my teacher within the classroom. I made connections with people that helped me with my essays that were meant for school, but they were not my teachers. They were not my tutors. They were just at the library. And I actually made a really good connection with one of the teen library staff members who helped me be part of like the teen council that the library had. And through that, I was able to improve on my leadership skills outside of school, which is something that I know a lot of students do not get opportunities to. And with the Boys and Girls Club, the Boys and Girls Club really talks about, it helps a lot of immigrant kids understand and learn more about scholarships, which is something that a lot of us still need to be like educated on. We still need help filling out those scholarships. And I was able to do even I remember college visits through the Boys and Girls Club. I did school visits, college visits with my school, but through the Boys and Girls Club I was able to expand my options, and I was able to visit even more colleges and learn more about different colleges that were even outside of state that I wouldn't be able to learn within the school.
And Margarida, I'm curious. You talked incredibly about the continuity of experience in high school. When did you join the Boys and Girls Club? How long were you with them? And how much was that also a different but continuous group of relationships with peers and adults?
I actually joined the Boys and Girls Club before going into high school. So I was able to not just get help from just the middle school Margarida, but they helped me grow as the high school Margarida, because I remember my freshman year, they held a mini class that was already talking about college essays. And I know that as a freshman, not a lot of people are really thinking about college, but I remember that class is what really motivated me to think more about college, look at my options, and start thinking of life after high school, even though I was just a freshman. And I know that if I had to like depend on school, I was not going to join a class that was talking about college essays in the beginning of a freshman high school girl.
And so, Margarita, you talked about how they helped you. Who is the they? Give us the language of who those people are. Ron described the people in schools, their teachers, their folks in the cafeteria, their counselors, their nurses, etc. Who are the they in these other organizations?
So the Boys and Girls Club, the great thing they do is they hire staff members who are, from everywhere. They have a really diverse staff, and they don't just focus on specific students. They focus on every teenager. So I remember that one of the staff members that worked there, she was actually like one of the secretaries, and she was the one that told me about the class that I joined for college writing. And who would have thought that a secretary at the Boys and Girls Club would make a girl who just like entered the US join a class that's already talking about 4 or 5 years into like her life, 5 years later. So they don't really have like, oh, the president is the one who's going to come talk to teenagers about anybody. A staff member who's just watching the kids, they know about different activities that are happening at the club, and they know which kids like which activities. So I really like the focus of different staff members being able to know students no matter what their rank is within the organization, no matter what their occupation is or what their role is. Everybody just takes their time to know the students that go into the Boys and Girls Club, and they try to understand what students need, and they try to meet the needs.
That's really powerful. Ron, you mentioned that, and Margarita, I know you gave the valedictorian speech, as I understand, to your class,
Yes.
which was amazing. And Ron, you mentioned that 99% of the class is graduating and moving on. That must mean that they're well prepared. We haven't talked about academics in this entire conversation, but clearly something was going on, that these young people were not just engaged and connected and learning about their identities and building out their full selves. They were also becoming very well prepared. Can you just give us a little bit about, we often hear, is it either or? Did we focus on the social and emotional, or did we focus on the academic? How did that really work together?
Well, Karen, it is a crazy thing that we think of this as a trade-off, that we focus on the social, emotional health of students, or their identity and their sense of belonging and their character, or we focus on their academics. Because the science makes it so clear that those things are interdependent, and that every parent already knows that if your child does not feel that she belongs, does not feel respected and valued in school, she's not going to do well. That those things, that confidence and a sense of belonging and a sense of being valued, are a foundation for doing well academically. And so it's not a coincidence that a school like the high school Margarita just graduated from not only had 99% of students graduate on time and 99% of students get into college, most of whom are low-income students, many of whom are students of color and many immigrants like Margarita's family, but that has been their graduation record and college acceptance record for more than a dozen years since they opened. Every single year for about 15 years, that school has got 99% of students into college. So it's working academically. It's not a trade-off. It's by building an environment that kids feel safe and cared for and where they look out for each other that we can push academically. And it's not just the adults pushing. I think Margarita could speak to this, but the students are pushing each other as well. That there's a positive peer pressure in those schools where students are supporting each other but also pushing each other to succeed academically.
So with that track record over that many years, we have to ask the question, why hasn't this kind of success scaled across the country? Why are we still trying to figure this out? So Margarita, if you were to sort of stand up in front of a bunch of students, and there are many student groups that are really focused on school reform, what would you tell them that they really should be doing? What's the secret sauce that you want them to understand?
I feel like firstly understanding like our intersectionalities is the number one thing, because everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has something going on outside and inside of school. Understanding each other, not just as scholars, but as people and human beings, is something that really helps, not just as a peer, but also from student to teacher and teacher to student and teacher to teacher, of course. Once you really understand what's going on with somebody outside of just their grade, once you stop caring and focusing on just one specific thing, you're able to help them even better. And something that I always touch on is our revising policy that we had at school, where your first work isn't necessarily your best work. And we were given so many opportunities to revise, so many opportunities. And without those, we're not going to be able to make it, and we're not going to be able to succeed. We're not going to be able to graduate with the grades that we had. And it's all about just taking a risk and doing it, because I know that something that my school does great is encouraging every student to apply to college. That's something that other schools don't really do. It's like, it's either you apply or you don't. But at school, for me, it was like, it was kind of mandatory. Like, you have to apply to at least one college. And what our teachers always said is, they did that because once a student sees that they've gotten accepted into one college, that motivates them to apply to even more colleges, because they know that, oh, I am college material. Some students just don't apply because they don't think they're really going to get accepted, or that they're going to get the answer or the response that they want. So the teachers really push us, and students, we celebrate each other's accomplishments. Every time someone got accepted into a college, we did this thing called moving on up, and every student does moving on up, which means that you've got a letter of acceptance from at least one college, whether or not you're going into college, whether you're taking a gap year, whether you just simply don't want to. Just having that letter of acceptance says that I graduated, I made it, and yeah, I can do college if I feel like it.
And Ron, I know that you have been working at this for many years and have worked with many schools, but as we have this opportunity coming out of the disruption from COVID and coming out of the urgency of us really being able to do this better and with more schools, how do you take this to scale? What's the next step that we need to be doing to really help schools and communities across the country understand the role of adults, all adults, the role of schools, the role of these community partners? How do we get this message out there, and how do we really do the kind of hard professional development and courageous work? How do you get that happening?
Well, I think that we're all so busy in education and in community support work, Karen, that it's hard for us to slow down and rethink the paradigm of what's here. And I think we need to rethink public education in some basic ways. When I was born, fewer than half of American students graduated from high school. Most students dropped out. Most students. And that was not considered a big problem in the 1950s, because it was assumed that most students didn't need to finish high school because there was good jobs in industry and in trades, and students could get good work. And not everyone needed to finish high school and go to college. That was not an issue. It's a different world now. That industry is not in the United States anymore. We now have the charge in public education to make sure every kid has the option of higher education, as Margarita just said. But we haven't rethought what schools look like. Schools are still set up to sort students so that only a few of them would go on, and they need to be set up for the success of every student. I think every teacher and every school leader goes into this profession with a noble purpose. I think every one of them wants to help kids succeed. It's not the fault of the teachers or the leaders, it's the structures that they're having to live in that keep us rushed, that don't allow time for daily crew meetings, that don't allow staff time to plan, to work together, that don't allow staff time to connect with the community and to tap into that web of community resources, the time for school members to meet with outside youth organizations, the time for students to get out of the building and do that work. Margarita talked about going away to an island for 4 days as a freshman. Most schools would say there's no way we could fit that in. Our district would not allow it. The structure of school would not allow it. We need to loosen up and decide if we want every kid to succeed, we need to rethink some of that bureaucracy and allow schools to connect to a broader wealth of community resources and support. If we expect every kid to succeed, school can't look the same as it did in the 1950s. It's a different world now.
One last question. What you all have described, the kind of things that you want schools to take time for, are often the kind of things that happen in summer. For some kids, not for all kids, more for affluent kids than for kids from lower income families and communities. So what should we do to help people understand that the learning, these kind of learning experiences that you're talking about, we do sort of make time for them, but we actually make time for them when schools close? Margaret, can you talk a little bit about your summer?
Yeah, so I've always tried to keep myself busy over the summer, but I've had other peers who didn't do anything in the summer. They will just work or just stay at home. But I've kept myself busy because my school always provided opportunities for the summer. Boys and Girls Club always gave me opportunities for the summer. The library always was opened and always there was something happening for the summer. And not a lot of people have the opportunity to do that. Not everyone has transportation to get to those places. Going into school and being able to do those things at school is very different than being able to do it at your free time, because not everyone has the same access to the same resources, and not everyone has the same time outside of school to be involved.
And Ron, I'll give you the last word. You know, there's so many phrases in education about expanded learning and extended day and whatever. You talked about this pressure of time. How do we really think about time differently as we're looking at the day and the year to make sure that schools really have this time to blend with community in a different way?
I do feel, Karen, that for equity reasons, we have to build some of that time into the school day for students to make those connections. I can say, knowing Margarita's life a little bit, that there was a point where she was working 3 jobs at the same time. Because of her family's economic circumstances, she was often working 15-hour days in the summer and then working a full-time job almost when she was also in school. And so the idea that she's going to have the freedom outside of school to make those connections is something that only wealthy kids can often have. And so we need to make sure school is a place that also makes those community connections for kids that they can pursue later, that helps them get internships, helps them get jobs, helps them know who else in the community they can connect with, helps connect them with the Boys and Girls Clubs and the libraries and the youth organizations. Because if we truly have this new charge in America that every kid should have the option of post-secondary success, we need to create time in school to make sure every kid can see all those opportunities for community support. And for a student like Margarita who worked, I'm not sure I've ever worked as many hours in my life as Margarita, you were working last year. And so it's really important that your school also gave you time to connect with community support.
I couldn't agree more, and I couldn't have said it, I really couldn't have said it any better. You've really sort of wrapped this up, bringing it back to this fundamental question of equity and the responsibility that we have in our public education systems to make sure this broader set of opportunities that you've described is available to all and not just what we do when school is out. So I really thank both of you for taking the time to talk with us today, and look forward to seeing you again.